Randy fell in love with Carol. Randy was home on leave before being deployed to Korea. His training took just over a year of service, and he had 45 days of leave. This took place in the countryside near Duluth, Minnesota. Dusty country roads, cool trout streams, green forests, and fields. Carol was the younger sister of Randy's best friend, Daniel. Randy knew Carol, but when he left, she was still a gangly girl with long limbs, but now she was breathtaking. Carol was short like her mother, about 5 feet 2 and about 157 centimeters. She may have weighed about 45 kilograms, but she was not frail. She was a country girl who grew up on a farm. Her strawberry blonde hair, bright green eyes, scattering of freckles on her cheeks and nose, dazzling smile and laugh that sounded like ice bells made Randy shiver. Smart, eloquent, and outspoken, Carol was the embodiment of summer sunshine. Randy met Carol at a swimming hole in the city park. She saw him, waved, and shouted, "Hi, Randy, when did you get home?" swimming to the shore. When she reached the shallow water and stood up, Randy was speechless. It reminded him of the picture of Aphrodite rising from the waves that he had seen at school. She was wearing a bronze swimsuit, her skin tanned to almost the same color. From a distance, it seemed that she was completely naked. Carol ran up to Randy, all wet, and hugged him. She smelled of the river and the summer sun. Randy hugged her, and at that moment he didn't want to let her go. They had a wonderful day. The girls Carol came to the park with realized that no one else existed for her as soon as she saw Randy. The two didn't take their eyes off each other. For the next 40 days, they spent every minute together that they could. It was, without a doubt, the best summer of their lives. About 5 days before Randy was scheduled to fly to Korea, Carol's father, Mark, met him at the door when he came to pick her up for a movie date. "Randy, we need to talk before you go to the movies." "Randy, she's my only daughter, and from what her mother says, things are getting serious with you. I'm not going to stop you from seeing her. I won't say that you can't call or text her while you're abroad. But I want you to wait until she graduates before doing anything serious like getting engaged or getting married. It's obvious to everyone that you love each other. Just slow down, please. Mr. Zarutsky, I love your daughter. I want her to be mine forever. When I return home, if she feels the same way about me, I want to marry her. Randy, if you wait until then, you will have my blessing." They talked about Randy's plans for the future, his service, and what Korea could be like now. When Mark was there, fighting was still going on, and a truce had not been signed. After an important conversation and resolution of issues, they had a wonderful date. For the remaining few days, they sat together, talking quietly. Randy gave Carol the promise ring he had purchased. The day he left for the Twin Cities to catch the first of several flights was a sad day for both of them. A year seemed like a long time. Randy's arrival at Austin Air Base was one of nearly 1,000 that day. The U.S. has maintained a full-fledged division, the 2nd Infantry Division, and numerous support units in South Korea since the war. In addition, the headquarters of the 1st Corps was located in the country, near the capital of South Korea, Seoul. Randy was taken to I Corps headquarters and walked through the replacement battalion. It was a week of vaccinations, training, tours of the demilitarized zone, and disturbing films about the various diseases prevalent in the cities near each American base. On 2 occasions, Randy drove outside the base and was shocked that the military police at the gate forced everyone, regardless of gender, to take at least one set of sexual protection equipment from a large box at the guard post. It even was full of shops with any goods that a soldier might need. Dozens of bars within walking distance, restaurants, furniture stores, souvenir shops, tailors, shoemakers, everything was here, or at least a pirated copy. There were also many jewelry stores. Randy began to formulate an idea for a yellow gold sapphire and diamond engagement ring set. Randy asked for the help of one of the Korean translators he met to help him negotiate a price for what he wanted. Randy ordered a set of rings for just over $1,000. After a week in the replacement battalion, Randy was assigned to the 332nd Military Intelligence Battalion at Camp Page. Randy was a 98C and intelligence signals analyst. He was assigned to a reconnaissance battalion that supported the 2nd Infantry Division. Camp Page was a small base, consisting only of an airstrip, a few motor pools, and the barracks of the 2 supply battalions that were located there. She was less than 20 kilometers from the demilitarized zone. The barracks themselves were old hangar structures built immediately after the cessation of hostilities in 1953. They were in good condition and quite suitable for living. Randy was placed in a room for 4 that was already occupied by 3 Katusa Korean troops assigned to the U.S. Army. Katusa soldiers serving in the 332nd Reconnaissance Battalion typically came from relatively wealthy Korean families. They had a lot of personal belongings, and Randy had almost nothing. He had his bed, locker, and nightstand. Randy's days were filled with physical training, shooting ranges, and maintaining vehicles in the motor pool. He completed the necessary training to obtain a military driver's license, and because he admitted he could drive a manual car, he was assigned to drive the M880. The M880 was the military version of the Dodge Power Wagon, a 4-wheel drive, half-ton pickup truck. The one Randy got was known in the unit for almost never starting. Randy, it turns out, drove a 318 cubic inch Dodge Power Wagon at home, which he left in the care of his father. He knew that the automatic air valve on these cars almost never worked, so after the 2nd week, when his car wouldn't start again, he went into town and bought a manual valve control kit. Although he was not allowed to make such changes, he did it anyway. Since installing the manual air valve, the truck has been reliable. You had to pull the handle to close the valve, press the gas pedal several times, and turn the ignition key while continuing to press the gas. The engine usually started on the 3rd revolution. These old Dodges required a lot of fuel. Every Saturday, Randy went to the telephone exchange on base and made 2 calls home. One to his mother, the other to Carol. Each of the main women in his life discussed different topics, and he missed both. His calls to Carol brought relief from hearing her voice, but at the same time made the separation harder. About 2 months into his service in Korea, Randy left for field training. It's time to learn how to set up camps, dig trenches, set up field bases, and string barbed wire. During this exercise, his mail suddenly stopped. He usually received 3 letters a day, one from Carol daily and another 1 or 2 from other people in his life. This bothered him, but at that moment he had other things to do. When their unit returned from training, his platoon sergeant, SFCK, found Randy and told him that they were heading to the commander's office. Sergeant K went over the report to the officer on the premises rules with Randy again to make sure he did everything right. Randy went to the unit headquarters, knocked on the door to the commander's office, entered as ordered, stood a step away from the commander's desk, stood at attention, saluted, and said, "Specialist McCabe reporting, sir." There were 4 people in the room: Randy himself, SFCK, Staff Sergeant Johnson, and Captain McCandles, the company commander. The commander restored Randy's honor, ordered him to stand at ease, and then ruined his life. "Specialist McCabe, I am saddened to report that there has been a traffic accident at home involving Carol Zarudsky. Specialist, I'm sorry to report that she did not survive the accident. I'm sorry for your loss, Specialist. I know that she was dear to you. The Red Cross informed me of this on the 2nd day of your field exercise, and I made the decision to hold your mail until you returned. Your relationship with her did not meet the criteria for emergency compassionate leave. If she were your fiancé, we could send you home for her funeral. But in this case, I could not authorize your leave. Do you have any questions, Specialist?" Randy was in complete shock. He muttered, "No, sir." "In that case, Specialist, I lift the ban on your mail. The first sergeant has arranged a 4-day leave for you to recover. Specialist, you are free." Randy stood at attention again and saluted again, which the commander returned. Randy turned on the spot and walked out the door, carefully closing it behind him. After 4 steps, he fell to his knees, crying in the company operations room. Sergeant First Class Wilson stood up, helped Randy into a chair, and gave him a glass of water. She knew that Randy had been reported, as had almost everyone else in the unit. Once Randy had recovered a little from the shock, he pulled himself together. When Sergeant Wilson saw him looking at her, she told him to go see the first sergeant in his office. Randy stood up and went where he was told. When he entered the staff sergeant's office, he said, "Sit down, specialist." And when he saw that Randy was about to object and stand up, he added, "This is not a request, specialist, sit down. Now you think that with a 4-day vacation you can go home. Forget about it, you won't succeed. You won't succeed because you won't be able to find flights home and back to catch. You won't be able to, because I've already put you on the list of those who are not allowed to fly on military aircraft. You won't succeed because me and Sergeant K won't let you ruin your life by becoming a deserter. I have a 4-day leave for you, just like the commander said, but you won't be able to leave the base without being accompanied by a sergeant until the end of the month. Don't argue, just accept it. I won't let you run away from me. Now get out of my office. I highly recommend you take a shower. You smell like an asshole." Randy left the staff sergeant's office and headed towards the exit of the company headquarters building. On his way out, Sergeant Jackson, the unit's mail carrier, handed him a stack of letters 4 inches thick. As he walked outside, Randy noticed Sergeant K waved his hand at him. He told Randy to get himself in order, read the letters, and make the necessary calls. Once that was done, he had to find the sergeant in the platoon's operations room. Randy spent the rest of the day on autopilot. He took a shower because he was told to, read letters because he had to. The oldest letters told of how a drunk driver drove into oncoming traffic and collided head-on with Carol as she was returning home from babysitting a neighbor's children. She was less than half a mile from home. All the letters contained condolences for her death and regret about what happened. Later letters expressed dissatisfaction that Randy had not written or attended the funeral. He called his mother, who first scolded him for not coming home, and then burst into tears when she learned that Randy had just learned that Carol had died. He then called Carol on the phone, and her mom also told him off, then burst into tears when he was able to explain what happened. He then went in search of Sergeant K. The entire platoon was waiting for him. There were bottles of drinks from the Class 5 store, and a lot of people who wanted to spend time with him. Before the evening was over, they had Randy in his bed. Randy spent the next 4 days and most evenings over the next 3 weeks trying to lose himself in alcohol. He didn't cope well with the loss. Very bad. Several weeks have passed since Randy learned of Carol's death. He spent his free time drinking. He somehow managed to ensure that his drunkenness did not interfere with his work, but his superiors saw this and were seriously concerned. In addition, he increasingly isolated himself from those around him. The few friendships he had begun to form within the unit began to fade. The enormous amount of sympathy he received from those around him gradually gave way to pity as they watched him destroy himself. In addition, his presence became a constant reminder to everyone that the company commander did the wrong thing by informing Randy about Carol's death. He became something of a nuisance to the command. During this time, Randy began to have very vivid dreams. In these dreams, he saw Carol walking along a 2-track road that ran through gently rolling terrain past meadows and forests. She was wearing a light floral dress, and in her hands she carried a wide-brimmed white straw hat. Her back was always facing him, and no matter how hard he tried to catch up with her, he could not. If he called her, she would turn around and wave at him, as if to say, "Hurry up." But no matter how hard he tried, he could not close the distance between them. These dreams did not stop until he arrived at the field station. The 332nd Military Intelligence Battalion has been assigned to deploy additional personnel to the NSA field station at Camp Humphreys. Today, Camp Humphreys is the headquarters of I Corps. At that time, it consisted of a field station and several supporting battalions for the 2nd Infantry Division. The field station was physically separated from the rest of the base by an airstrip and its own fence. The decision was made to send Randy to the field station. This solved several problems for the command at once. Randy didn't have much, less than 2 bags, and his departure went almost unnoticed. His arrival introduced him to First Sergeant Pashton. Pashton had just been transferred from the sergeant's school and became the first sergeant of the company. He treated the soldiers as if they had just arrived for training. Anyone below the rank of sergeant first class was prohibited from leaving the base without special permission. Pashton strictly monitored the implementation of all the little things that would be the norm in most active units. But at the field station, things were a little different. The station personnel worked on a shift schedule: 4 shifts from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 2 days of rest, 4 shifts from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., then again 2 days of rest. First Sergeant Pashton was informed in advance by the 332nd Battalion Command about what happened to Randy. He was not sympathetic. He made it clear to Randy that he had no intention of showing mercy. Because he was informed that Randy might be drinking too much, Pashton restricted his access off base. He did not take away his permission to leave, but he did require Randy to report to the unit duty officer whenever he used it. The departure time was recorded in the log, and he had to return to base no later than 12 hours later. This situation continued until the week before Christmas. That week turned out to be a very busy one for the unit. Company responsibilities and personnel shortages due to rotations of troops completing their one-year tours of duty in Korea caused the conflict. There weren't enough people to complete all the tasks. Because it became apparent that the 3 mandatory daily company formations assigned by the company commander were continually delayed and causing problems with squad changes at the field station, the company commander was told to stop conducting formations. In addition, many other company-specific rules, such as off-base permits, additional barracks inspections, and all sorts of military red tape, were reviewed and discontinued. In addition, renovation of the barracks began. Rooms for 2 people were now designed for 4. All sergeants and above were ordered to find housing off base. A Korean construction crew spent a week dismantling the old structures. They got to the point where the buildings no longer had heat or water, and then the contractor pulled his crews off-site and demanded a renegotiation of the contract. The first thing Randy did with his exit permits returned was go to the store at I Corps headquarters and put the money down for a Harley-Davidson Sportster through the Army Acquisition Program. He decided to pay off the cost of the motorcycle while he was in Korea and then pick it up when he returned home. The motorcycle would be waiting for him at a dealership in St. Cloud, Minnesota, about 140 miles from home. His Uncle Jim did the same when he went to Vietnam in 1967. Now it is January. Daytime temperatures barely reached -5°C, and night temperatures sometimes dropped below -20. There was no heating or water in the barracks. How did the command react? It provided everyone with an extra blanket and arranged for soldiers from Randy's unit to use bathrooms and showers in nearby barracks. In exchange for this privilege, soldiers from Randy's company were required to clean these premises twice a week. For Randy, all this meant that he finally had access outside the base, like all the other soldiers serving at Camp Humphreys. But he was not particularly impressed by the bars and clubs outside the base. His best friend in the unit was Brent Anthony Timmons, or Ba for friends. Not only did it match his initials, but it also suited his personality. Ba was the complete opposite of Randy, dark-skinned while Randy was almost snow white, short while Randy was tall, stocky and Randy skinny. Friendship like the heroes of the comics, the Kid and the Dwarf. In the second week of January, the monthly alarm sounded. Everyone grabbed their weapons and equipment and headed to various defensive positions around the perimeter of the base. Randy was in town at the time and was half drunk. Randy spent almost all his free time, starting from the time he was given back the right to go outside the base, drinking. He returned to base, grabbed his equipment, and headed to the armory. When he got there, he was told to report to the first sergeant because he was late. Randy found Sergeant Pashton and reported his arrival. "Why are you late, Specialist?" asked the first sergeant. "I was in town on the day off, First Sergeant," Randy replied. "Have you been drinking today?" "Yes, First Sergeant," he drank. "Then why did you return to base?" "It's an alarm, First Sergeant." The company commander had just explained during the formation that in the event of an alarm, we must return to base as quickly as possible. I see, specialist. I want you to take a position between the field station and the antenna field, near the repair shop. Got it, First Sergeant. Randy went to the position indicated to him. The temperature was just above freezing Fahrenheit, around minus 17 degrees Celsius, and the wind was blowing at about 20 miles per hour straight from Siberia. The perceived temperature was well below zero. When Randy got to the position, it was completely covered in ice, and there was nowhere to shelter from the wind. He began carrying pallets and barrels to make at least some kind of shelter out of them, over which he threw a frozen tarpaulin. He was soon joined by another soldier from the unit. It was Tyrone from Alabama. He was wearing twice as much clothing as Randy, but within 10 minutes he was already shivering from the cold. Within 20 minutes, parts of his face and ears began to take on a waxy hue that signaled the onset of frostbite. Randy noticed this and said to Tyrone, "Go back to the barracks, you're starting to get frostbite." Tyrone left, and Randy remained to wait for the alarm or shift to end. 3 hours later, the company supply officer, Sergeant Hill, came to him. "Specialist McCabe, are you there?" asked the sergeant. "Yes, Sergeant Hill, I'm here." "Why are you still here?" "The alarm ended 2 hours ago. Everyone thought you ran over the fence with a gun. Return to the barracks immediately. No one informed me that the alarm was over, Sergeant. And they didn't send any replacements." Randy returned to the barracks and turned in his weapons. He was ordered to report to the first sergeant. When he entered the first sergeant's office, Sergeant Handy, his platoon sergeant, and the company captain, Captain Cardinal, were there. "Where have you been, specialist?" asked the first sergeant. "At the defensive position you assigned me, First Sergeant." "Why didn't you come back when the alarm was over?" "No one came to tell me about this, First Sergeant." "You sent Private Wilson back to the barracks. Why didn't you leave with him?" "First Sergeant, Private Wilson is showing signs of frostbite. I sent him for medical help, but I remained at my post because I was not released." At this point, Sergeant Handy was trying to hold back his laughter. First Sergeant Pashton was blushing with anger, and Captain Cardinal just shook his head. "Sergeant Handy, take the specialist to the canteen. Maybe there's still hot soup there," the captain said, leaving the office. "Come with me, McCabe," the platoon sergeant said, and Randy went with him to get some soup. Randy later learned that there had been a serious conversation between the captain and the first sergeant about the fact that Sergeant Pashton had forgotten where he sent the people during the alarm. This incident clearly did not help Randy earn the favor of the first sergeant. Timmons was a big fan of the city outside of Austin Air Force Base. He discovered that there were many more American girls there than at Humphreys Base. He met one of them, and since then they spent almost every free day together. Timmons met Janice 2 months before Randy's right to go off base was restored. Randy and worked on the same schedule, so around mid-January Randy went with him to Austin. The first thing Randy noticed were the rings on Janice's fingers. In his world, this was a line that could not be crossed. When he had the opportunity, he pointed it out to Timmons told him to relax. It turned out that Janice's husband was serving in Germany, and they lived with her according to the principle, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one who is next to you. Randy never got used to Janice. On his second trip to Austin, Randy met Diane. She was almost the same height as him, a little older, blonde, curvy, and blue eyes. But at that moment she was very drunk and seemed to be alone. What caught Randy's attention was how 5 Korean guys tried to pull her out of the booth and out the back door, despite her drunken protests. They had already pulled her out of the booth and headed towards the exit when Randy intervened. He approached them and said, "Hey, honey, there you are. Why did you leave the group?" The blonde looked at him with confusion, and as Randy got closer, one of the guys tried to get in his way. Randy said, "Honey, even the military police are looking for us." After these words, the guy stopped blocking him. The other 2 ran out the back door, and Randy was able to get to the blonde and hold her as she began to fall. The remaining 3 exchanged a few words and also left. The military police in Korea, known as the KMP, were particularly harsh, especially against locals who attacked American troops. Randy almost carried the blonde to the front door and said, I don't know who you are, but we need to get you out of here right now. Diane, my name is Diane, the blonde muttered. Okay, Diane, let's go to the base. No, not to the base, to my home. We need to go home. Turn left there, she said, pointing to the next street. Diane directed Randy to a small concrete block building a few blocks from the bar. They walked inside and Diane began searching for her keys in her jeans. When she took them out, she couldn't get the right key into the lock. She handed them to Randy and said, "Here you go." Randy leaned her against the wall and opened the door. Before he could do so, Diane slid to the floor. She was about to fall over on her side when Randy caught her. Randy picked Diane up, brought her into the room, and laid her on the bed. It was a typical Korean home: a raised platform bed, an armchair, a vanity table with a mirror, a cabinet-like piece of furniture, a small countertop with a sink and stove. The second room was a simple Western-style bathroom, with cosmetics and other things placed on all horizontal surfaces. Everything looked lived in, but far from perfect. Randy laid her on the bed, lifted her legs, and covered her with a blanket. While he was doing this, he looked at her left hand. There were no rings. "I guess I'll go," he said. Diane mumbled, "No, stay with me." And then she fell asleep, quietly snoring. Randy took the blanket that was half lying on the floor, sat down in a chair, and thought, "To hell with it. It's late, Ba and Janice have long since disappeared, and this is better than returning to base by taxi. I'll stay a couple of hours, wait for the buses to start running, and then head back to Humphreys." Randy had drunk more than he thought he would and was tired. What should have been a short nap ended with him being poked in the ribs with a stick and an angry woman saying, "Who the hell are you?" Randy didn't wake up or react quickly enough, so she hit him. As she was about to hit him again, Randy caught the stick and said, "Hey, it hurts like hell. What the hell are you doing?" While they were tugging at the stick, Diana screamed, "Who the hell are you, and why are you in my house?" Randy's head cleared a little, and he replied, "I'm Specialist Randy McCabe. Last night, I saw 5 Koreans trying to take you out the back door of a bar, and I saved you. I was going to take you to the base, but you insisted that we come here. I wanted to leave, but you said to stay, so I stayed. I was going to leave after a short nap, but I overslept. Well, you can leave now, Specialist Randy McCabe." Randy was out of there in a flash. He went to the apartment Janice was renting in town, found Ba, and they headed back to Humphreys. 4 days later, they were back in the same area, near Austin Air Base. It was about 6 p.m. when Ba and Janice left Randy at the bar and went to her house. This was the second bar they left, and it was there that Randy met Diana again. When she saw him, she walked over from the group she was with and said, "Randy, right? I have to apologize to you and thank you for saving me a few days ago." "No problem, madam. I will never leave a person in such a situation." Thus began a night of talking, drinking, flirting, and eventually they ended up back at her house. But nothing particularly sexual happened. Both were so drunk that they could not hold out longer than the kiss. The next morning, they both had terrible hangovers. The light hurt, the sound of the dripping faucet was annoying, the air was unbearably heavy. No one had the desire to talk. This kind of hangover is a common consequence of the local alcohol Jinro soju. Approximately 40 degrees with the addition of various chemicals and a significant amount of formaldehyde as a preservative. The best soju hangover cure is more soju, and that's what Randy and Diane were looking for. For the next 4 months, Randy spent all his free time in Austin, either at the bar, at Diana's, or, most often, with Diana. By the end of this time, he had significantly reduced his drinking. He began to have real feelings for her, and thought that she was also on the same wavelength. One day, Randy was waiting for Diana at her house. It was the first time he saw her in uniform. Randy always thought she was a sergeant, but she had captain's shoulder straps. It turned out that she was not a laboratory assistant, but a nurse. This left him confused. Officers and junior personnel should not communicate outside of duty. This is strictly prohibited. If this is discovered, then punishment under the criminal code of military justice is inevitable, and it is the junior personnel who suffer first. However, Diana's title was not the only surprise for Randy. There was a wedding ring on her ring finger. Randy made his negative attitude towards cheaters clear early in the relationship. Diana looked at him sadly and said, "Randy, we need to talk." These words never bode well for a relationship. Diana revealed that she had been cheating on Randy since the very first night at the bar when he saved her. That evening, she got drunk to gain the courage to meet someone. Her husband, a fighter pilot, said he had found a girlfriend for the duration of their separation. They had been married less than 3 years when he was assigned to Yokota Base in Japan and she to Asen. They agreed that physical separation would be considered a temporary break in the relationship. He was going to find someone for his fun, and she had to do the same. However, 5 local guys were too much, and the appearance of Randy turned out to be her salvation. Her last words were, "We can't see each other anymore. He will be transferred here in a week. Sorry, Randy." Randy silently put the key on the table and left. He headed to the very bar where he first saw her, got half drunk, and went to Ba and Janice. Janice met him at the door, looked at him and said, "She finally told you everything, right? Did you know? Did you fucking know? I thought we were friends, Janice." At that moment, Ba appeared. "Randy, grow up. She was just another toy." "Ba, she meant more to me, and you damn well knew it. I told you what happened to Carol. You knew that I was falling in love with Diana. I told you everything. You must have been bursting with laughter. I was your own fool for jokes, wasn't I, Ba?" Randy turned to leave, but Ba grabbed him by the hand. Ba didn't even have time to understand what had happened. Randy stayed only to make sure that Ba breathing and left to catch the last bus to Humphreys. When Randy got to the bus station, he was just in time to see the last bus leave. It was mid-April and drizzling. Although the journey was not long, it was unpleasant to walk in the cold. Getting wet in 40-degree weather is a dubious pleasure. When Randy got to town, he hit every bar on his way. By the time he reached the gate, he could barely stand. From the gate, it was almost half a mile to his barracks, and the sidewalk there ran along a deep benjo ditch, an open sewer ditch. One wrong step, and you could end up in a ditch. Randy stumbled. The side walls of the ditch were inclined so that if you stood close to the wall, you could reach the edge with your hand. But at the very bottom, there was a 6-foot, approximately 2-meter vertical wall leading into a slippery, foul-smelling muck. Randy hit rock bottom. He tried to get out 4 times, but each time he fell again. Eventually, he began to wade through the ditch, ankle-deep in muddy liquid, towards his barracks. Almost at the field itself, near the station gate, the ditch was already only 5 feet deep, and here Randy managed to get out. When he arrived at the barracks, the duty sergeant was already waiting for him with a 1.5-inch fire hose. He told Randy to strip down to his jeans and gave him a good rinse with water. Then he threw him some towels and a bar of Army yellow soap and sent him to another barracks to take a shower. The hot shower helped Randy warm up, and the harsh soap took away the stench. Randy thought that he would get punished for what happened, but the duty officer just laughed and told him to go to bed and sober up. For the rest of his time in Korea, Randy barely spoke to Bob. Brent left Korea 2 months before Randy and was sent to Fort Ord in Washington State. He served out the remainder of his tour of duty there and returned home to Phoenix, Arizona. Ba managed to save enough money to buy a small store, his dream of wealth. But 3 months after buying the store, it was robbed by a man who had only been released from prison 3 weeks ago. The first thing the robber did was shoot Ba, and he died. Randy found out about this only almost 25 years later during a conversation on Facebook Messenger with their mutual friend from Korea, Janice. She kept in touch with Ba before his robbery and even attended his funeral. Janice also told Randy about Diana. Her marriage failed when her husband was transferred to serve in Asen. The lawsuit was filed by a girl from Yokota with whom he had an affair, and this was what started the quarrel, after which he beat Diana. When she left Korea, Janice lost contact with her. Its pilot was sent to Leavenworth Prison for 10 years. As for Janice, she had been married and divorced 3 times and was about to get divorced for the 4th time at the time of conversation. It turned out that she had problems with fidelity. She openly admitted that it was her attraction to a new and unusual man that caused the breakdown of all her marriages. Randy advised her not to get married again, but Janice just laughed. It turns out that every divorce brought her financial benefit. After the Benjo Ditch incident, Randy stopped going out on the town to get drunk. And there was no need for this. Just 50 meters from his barracks, there was a club called Let's Lower Enlisted Trash and Scum. He went there every chance he got. He didn't stop drinking, he just started drinking smarter. 3 months before he left Korea, Randy passed the exam for promotion to Sergeant E5. 2 months before returning to the United States, he was promoted to E5. This made him one of 10 E5 sergeants remaining in his unit. This meant he was on duty for 24 hours as a desk sergeant every 10 days or so. These 24-hour shifts were the longest periods Randy went without drinking during his entire stay in Korea. Randy signed up for the prison escort service. He was told that this could speed up his return home. It didn't work. On the contrary, he was left in Korea for an extra month. Escorting prisoners meant that the sergeant was in charge of a soldier being sent to Leavenworth Penitentiary. The soldier Randy was accompanying returned from the training ground to find his Korean prostitute girlfriend in bed with another soldier. He severely injured both of them. About a month before he went home, Randy began having dreams about Carol again. The scene was the same as before. Carol was wearing the same dress, she was walking ahead, and he was trying to catch up with her. This time he was a little closer, so much so that he could barely make out her laughter and hear her waving her hand to him, urging him to hurry. Randy met military police and a prisoner at the Osan Air Base terminal. There was another girl from the military police in the escort group. The prisoner didn't say a word the entire flight. The VP girl made it clear that she had no intention of having a conversation with Randy. When they landed in St. Louis, the prisoner was handed over to 2 other military policemen. Randy headed to the gate for his flight to Minneapolis, and the VP girl boarded the next flight back to Korea. Escorting prisoners was her full-time job. Step by step, day by day, life continued. Time passed and life went on. Randy landed at Minneapolis International Airport, expecting there to be a crowd of people waiting for him. He was disappointed only his father met him. They barely spoke as they waited at the carousel for Randy's luggage. Randy's father was never close to him. He rarely smiled, but was always ready to hit him in the back of the head for any mistake. He taught Randy fractions in the garage while repairing cars or equipment. If Randy brought the wrong key, the father would throw it at his son's head and send him for another. And if Randy took too long to find an instrument, he would get another hit. In Frank's car, Randy's father finally started a conversation. Randy immediately noticed that his father had changed. Now he talked to him almost like an equal, like an adult. Frank always treated Randy as if he was still the awkward, lazy 14-year-old he once was. My father didn't ask much about Korea, since he himself had served there with Carol's father, Mark, and still suffered from periodic post-deployment PTSD. This condition was not diagnosed, but it was obvious. From time to time, Frank would drink more and then go to his shack for a few days alone. It wasn't safe for him to be there with anyone. Frank returned looking exhausted, and for a while everything was fine. With age, such episodes began to occur less frequently, once or twice a year, or even less, but they did not disappear completely. At home, Randy ate normal food for the first time in a year. It was roast beef with potatoes and carrots, but to Randy it was the best meal ever. Later that night, Randy's mother, Mary, spoke with him for a while. They discussed Carol, her death, the funeral, and how everyone was shocked and disappointed that Randy didn't come home for the funeral. Not everyone believed that his commander had delayed both the letter notifying Carol of her death and Randy's mail itself. Carol's parents were among those who expressed doubt about the story, and Mary suggested that Randy call them the next day rather than go to them. Randy didn't even think about contacting Carol's parents. He understood that meeting them would stir up memories and emotions that he had never dealt with. Mary had to persuade him for 2 days before he finally went to them. It turned out to be just as bad as Randy had feared, if not worse. Carol's parents were almost angry with him. They believed he should have returned home for her funeral and that he could have done more. In fact, they blamed him for doing what they asked him to do. At the end of this visit, their long-term friendship with Carol's parents collapsed. 5 days after Randy returned home, he received a call that his Harley-Davidson Sportster motorcycle was ready for pickup. He and his brother David drove to St. Cloud to pick him up. When Randy arrived at the dealership, he was disappointed. The blue motorcycle he ordered turned out to be black, and the double seat was replaced with a single seat. When Randy pointed out these mistakes, the salesman adopted an arrogant, take-it-or-leave-it tone, but that approach didn't work. Randy was given a hotline number to contact in case of problems receiving the bike. He asked for access to the phone, and the salesman grinned. "What do you think this will do for you?" Randy called and explained the situation. The operator asked to pass the phone to either the manager or the owner. When the seller refused, David went to get the manager himself. The manager turned out to be the owner's son, and when he answered the phone, the operator explained to him that their dealership could be kicked out of the military sales program if they didn't fix the situation with Randy. It wasn't much of a threat to his son, but the owner was a veteran and proud of his involvement in the program. After speaking with the operator, the manager told Randy the truth. It turned out that his motorcycle had been in the service station for almost 3 months, and they were offered $800 extra to sell it to a local buyer. They reordered the bike, but it wasn't due to arrive for 3 weeks. The salesman called Randy to tell him the bike was ready and tried to sell him the model that was in the showroom. The dealer ended up offering Randy $500 to purchase the custom parts, as well as the love seat as originally ordered. Or he could wait 3 weeks. Randy accepted the offer because he wanted to start riding as soon as possible. He had already waited almost a year to get on his motorcycle, and he wasn't going to wait any longer. On the way home, he got off to a good start. There was a street dance going on that Saturday in the Gary area of Duluth. Part of the event was a motorcycle rally organized by local bike and classic car clubs. Participants brought toys for donation, then went on a big trip, followed by a celebration with lots of food and free beer. Randy bought a teddy bear, took a nice trip, ate a big meal, and was already pretty drunk when he met Tammy Whitehorse, who he previously knew as Tammy Lentz. Tammy was part of the group that Randy hung out with at school. They started talking, and a few hours later, when Randy had sobered up, they went for a ride on his bike. The walk ended at her home. They had previously been friends with benefits, and they didn't sleep much that night either. There were several revelations in the morning. Tammy woke Randy up with, "Rise and shine, lover," and he did indeed wake up. Without breakfast, she simply pushed him out the door with the words, "Call me later." Later, of course. Around noon, Tammy called him. "We need to talk, Randy. Meet me at 4 in the mall food court." Randy arrived early. When he saw Tammy, she was with 2 children in a double stroller. The boy was still a baby, and the girl could barely walk. Tammy waved to him and walked over. "Randy, meet Joshua and Janet." Tammy told Randy that she met Tom Whitehorse at a party at the University of Minnesota. They dated for 2 months, and she became pregnant. After that, they quickly got married. Tom was not a student, he was a Marine Corps sergeant and worked in the supply department. Living with him at the E5 level equivalent of a sergeant was borderline poverty. A few months after the wedding, he was sent to serve in Okinawa. It was supposed to be a shared accommodation, meaning Tammy and the kids could go with him. But Tom found a suitable girlfriend among the female Marines and never invited Tammy and the kids. Tammy wasn't happy about this at all, and in response, she started dating Randy again. When Randy found out about Tammy's marriage, he still didn't mind dating her on a regular basis. They spent every free minute together both in her apartment and riding his motorcycle. Towards the end of his vacation, Tammy began to develop romantic feelings for Randy. 3 days before he left for Fort Campbell, she admitted that she was thinking about divorcing Tom and moving in with Randy in Kentucky. Randy also began to have feelings for her. During the week before departure, Randy had dreams about Carol again. In each dream, she was further away from him, and in the last dream, the night before he left for Fort Campbell, she stopped and looked at him. Her face and her posture showed disappointment and anger, and no matter how hard he tried, he could not get closer to her. The next morning, he loaded his Sportster motorcycle into the back of his 1968 Dodge Crew Cab and hit Highway 53, heading south. There were new places and new faces ahead. He stayed overnight with his cousin in Joliet, Illinois, and the next evening signed papers to join Headquarters Company, 311th Military Intelligence Battalion. Life rarely goes according to plan, and as they say, even the best plans sometimes fall apart. Randy was going to continue this story, but circumstances intervened. First of all, it was summer, his busy season. Secondly, his life situation has changed in such a way that perhaps his release from service will come sooner than he expected, although not in the way he planned. Time will tell who will leave this place first. September 1984, April 1986. Randy's arrival at Fort Campbell was one of thousands of such annual arrivals for soldiers in the 101st Airborne Division. Soldiers come and go, and positions on unit rosters are filled. Randy was assigned to Headquarters Company, 311th Military Intelligence Battalion, which was then located at Fort Campbell in support of the 101st Air Assault Division. His specific unit is the Tiki Tactical Communications and Electronic Equipment Platoon. Within a week of his arrival, Randy had proven his usefulness in the engine department and found himself as an E5 sergeant in charge of maintaining the platoon's equipment and generators. He forgot the basic rule of any military service: never show that you can do something useful that is not related to your main specialty. However, Randy didn't mind. His analytical skills were recognized, but there were many like him in the unit. The main road outside the base was Highway 41. On a 20-mile stretch of this road, there were 3 bars for every other type of business. All the bars catered to the needs of the soldiers, and they were all essentially meat markets where the soldiers were treated less than well. It took Randy a little time to find 5 or 6 bars that he liked. They all offered cold beer, happy hour food specials, and a good female-to-male ratio. Randy was fine with the ladies, and he didn't date anyone in particular for about 6 months until he saved Iris. One day, Randy pulled into the parking lot of the Carriage Wheel Bar and parked his motorcycle next to other bikes. When he took off his helmet, he heard the girl shout, "Stop it." Randy saved the girl. She had already managed to get to her feet and said, "Oh God, we need to get out of here. His friends are coming." Time to leave the dangerous place. Randy and the blonde ran towards his motorcycle. He put on the now cracked helmet and handed her the spare helmet he kept with him. Randy started the motorcycle, and they rode away. Not knowing where to go, he headed to a river park in Clarksville. Randy found a secluded area and, after some time, learned her name Iris and what happened in the parking lot. Iris was a single mother. Her boyfriend, the child's father, lived with her off base until he was transferred to Korea. He left her with a 9-month-old son and a promise to send money to help. But he did not fulfill this promise. Their son was now 13 months old, and Iris was threatened with eviction from her apartment. Her electricity was cut off for non-payment, and she was left penniless. She came to the Carriage Wheel Bar hoping to find a man, either for one night or for a longer period, who would pay for the privilege of being with her. Her situation was critical. Her parents disowned her when she ran away with her boyfriend and told her not to call or come home again because she had become a disgrace to their family and to her father, who was an important Mormon figure in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Butte. The reason the soldier beat her was because she thought she had agreed to spend the night only with him, but he wanted it to be a night with him and his 4 friends and for the entire weekend. He became furious when she refused and tried to leave. Randy took her home and forgot his Boy Scout principles when she invited him to her apartment and then to her bed. Thus began their relationship, which continued for the next 5 months. At first, these were just meetings with benefits for both parties, but over time, Randy began to develop real feelings for Iris, and especially for her little son Dave. Randy really enjoyed being Dave's stepfather and spent more time with the boy than Iris herself. Shortly after Randy came into their lives, Iris found work as a waitress at a bar. She started working around 7 in the evening, which allowed them to spend some time together after Randy finished his work. She looked attractive and often attracted the attention of men, but she did not feel the need to look for anyone else. This period was the most sober in Randy's life since Carol's death. The role of father suited him well, and it helped him take control of his life. 2 months after they moved in together, Randy convinced Iris to call her mother, Violet, during the day when her father was supposed to be at work. At first, her mother was very angry with Iris for daring to call. But as soon as Iris mentioned that she had a grandson, Violet immediately softened and reproached her daughter for not calling earlier and sending photos. Iris started calling once a week, and then it became a daily habit. Her father Bruce was categorically against it until he saw the first photographs of his grandson. At that moment, he turned into a grandfather. Nothing melts the hearts of strict parents more than the face of a grandchild they didn't know existed. Randy wasn't included in the lease. He was just giving Iris money to pay the bills. So her parents' arrival a week before March 1st, 1985, with a U-Haul trailer came as a complete surprise to him. When Randy pulled up to the house, he saw an SUV with a trailer in the driveway. Much to his surprise, Iris's parents came out of the house with boxes. Bruce carried his box to the car and then walked up to Randy and extended his hand. Over the next 5 minutes, he tried to calmly explain that it would be best for everyone if he and Violet took Iris and Dave home to Butte. This came as a real shock to Randy. When Iris came out of the house, she was visibly scared and crying. She knew about her parents' arrival for 3 weeks, but hid it from Randy. She didn't want to hurt him, but she decided she wanted to go home. Randy didn't react the way she expected. He didn't get angry. He just started crying. Dave was playing outside and Randy walked up to him, picked him up, hugged him, then put him down again and walked away to his motorcycle. He drove to the carriage wheel, where he bought a beer that ended up lukewarm and stale since Randy didn't even touch it, and then returned home. Most of the furniture was still there, but all of Iris and Dave's belongings were gone. She left a note on the table with the keys to the used car that Randy bought for her. The note said that she was sorry, but did not see their relationship as long-term, and the offer to return home to her parents was too good to refuse. She promised to keep in touch, and at first she did send letters from time to time, but those letters stopped when Dave's biological father, Mike, returned from the army and came to Butte. Iris thanked Randy for everything he had done for her and her son, but explained that she was reconnecting with Mike, and they were better off putting the past behind them. The last message from Iris's family came in September 1985, when Bruce sent a newspaper announcing Iris and Mike's wedding and a note with the simple words, "Sorry, son, Bruce." Randy took all the things he needed out of the house, held a yard sale, donated a lot of things to charity, and gave up rent. His first sergeant gave him a sergeant's room in the barracks, and Randy returned to his old life. He began to drink heavily. Randy dated Brenda on and off for several months, but ended the relationship when he learned that she had many other men. He didn't like being one of many, so he simply stopped dating her. The last time Randy saw Brenda, she was no longer in good shape. She had been medically discharged due to pregnancy and was married to a guy named Bill, who, according to rumors, was not opposed to sharing his wife. Randy also dated Mary, who was funny, although not very smart. Mary had a large scar on the back and side of her head, the result of being hit with a bat during a fight at an amateur softball game. She joined the military after recovering from that injury to see the world. She showed signs of TBI, including significant personality changes that Randy was unaware of at the time, but later realized in retrospect. Mary was very flexible and didn't mind suggestions if she liked the person, and Randy clearly liked her. One of his favorite pastimes was taking her on motorcycle rides. They had a good time together until Randy was sent on a business trip for 45 days. When he returned, it turned out that she already had another boyfriend who began to use her as a girl of easy virtue. Randy returned to his old friend the bottle. By April 1986, Randy's drinking began to affect his health, and senior sergeants began to express concerns, as they called them. Everything was going to the point that either he would take control of his life and stop drinking, or his world would collapse. It was the third week of April 1986, Saturday, around 4 p.m. Severe thunderstorms stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes and moved east. Lightning flashed so often that it seemed as if they were shining continuously. Randy, very drunk and feeling sorry for himself, wandered around the parade ground next to the aluminum bleachers, carrying a 7-foot cane with brass tips on both ends. Lightning struck the top rail of the stands about 100 feet from Randy. When he came to, he found that he was completely sober. He looked at his watch, but the glass was broken and the LCD display was black. When he sat down, he noticed that his cane had shattered into splinters, and he could only find one burnt tip. The lightning burned a wide swath through the stands like a huge plasma cutter, starting 5 inches wide at the top and tapering to 1 inch at the bottom. It walked across the ground towards Randy and then spiraled like the inside of a snail's shell. Randy returned to the barracks with pain in his legs. When he took off his shoes, he discovered that the balls of both feet and the heels were bright red, as if from a sunburn. Randy lay down and didn't get up until the next morning. For the first time in many years, he did not crave alcohol. His need for drink disappeared. Over the next few weeks, he gradually remembered a dream he had while unconscious. It was a long conversation with Carol. He never fully remembered what she said, but Carol cried while she spoke to him. Randy always attributed his sudden desire to change his life to this dream. This changed his destiny forever. Options for extending his service were not appealing to Randy, and with less than 90 days remaining until his official end of its duty, he was discharged early as part of the then-current troop drawdown. It took less than a week to complete all the paperwork, and only a few hours to collect his things and load the motorcycle into the back of his F-150. Every night Randy dreamed about Carol again. She was still leading the way, but now she was so close. Based on his dreams, Randy did not immediately go home. He spent the next 10 years helping those who needed his skills, but more on that later. Randy left Fort Campbell on April 28, 1986, heading north on Highway 41A. He had been sober for almost 2 weeks, the longest he had been sober in years. It's time to move on again. As Randy drove down I-90 in central Montana, he thought about all the women he had known in the last 40 years since he lost Carol to a drunk driver. Every time he felt it was time to move on, he had a Carol dream, and every time she was a little closer. This time she was almost there as they walked through an apple orchard strewn with flowers. The sun was shining brightly, and the petals of the apple trees were spinning in the light wind. It was quite late, almost midnight, and there were few cars on this windy section of the highway. Randy was a little carried away by his thoughts and those pains that inevitably appear at the age of 60 in a person who has lived an active life. He looked away from the road for a moment, trying to find a suitable radio station. When he looked forward again, he saw the approaching headlights of an oncoming car. Randy froze for a moment and tried to turn, but he didn't have time. The two cars collided head-on at speeds of over 130 miles per hour. He didn't have a chance. It turned out that the driver of the other car was drunk. He only received a temporary license a week ago. He was released from prison a little over a year ago after serving time for a previous murder while driving while intoxicated. If he had survived the accident, it would have been his 15th drunk driving incident. Randy was sober. He had been sober since the spring of 1986, about 30 years. The last thing he saw was bright lights, followed by a blow that stunned him. The next thing he knew, he was standing next to a crying Carol, who hugged him and said, "What took you so long?" They stood in a field of ripe grain, and in the distance they could see a small town that looked like a scene from a Norman Rockwell painting. Carol took his hand and said, Let's go home." Almost half an hour passed before anyone drove past the scene of the accident. It took another 20 minutes for the first rescuers to arrive there. Hours passed before they were able to extract what was left of Randy from the wreckage. His body was taken to the local morgue, where several tests were performed to determine whether he was intoxicated. He was then taken to a local funeral home. It took 3 days to find his family. It took several more days to make the decision to cremate his remains and send them home. There was enough money in Randy's accounts and his insurance to cover all expenses. He had a will and his property was distributed according to it. It wasn't much, but those to whom he left it benefited from his legacy. One of Randy's great-nieces took to Randy's Facebook page and posted the date and time of his funeral in case anyone who knew him wanted to say goodbye. The day of the funeral was clear and sunny. The ceremony took place at the local morgue, which could usually accommodate a fairly large number of people. However, about 500 people came to Randy's funeral. Randy's hometown friends and family were only a small part of the crowd. There wasn't enough room in the room for all the flower arrangements sent by people who couldn't make it. There wasn't a single flower left for sale within a 100-mile radius. It was an ordinary, average ceremony, and after it, there was a reception in the city hall. It was there that Randy's family learned of what he had been doing for the past 30 years. In his own way and in his time, Randy improved the lives of almost everyone he met or helped. Many of the women he knew regretted their choices and said that perhaps if they had done things differently, Randy would have stayed with them longer, perhaps forever. But they all agreed, you have to live with the consequences of your decisions. Most of the stories about Randy were about how he showed up in moments of need and desperation with the necessary tools and attitude to make life better. And he always left after he restored normal life, because somewhere else someone needed his help again. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.